Welcome to Landmark Theater's Q&A podcast. In this podcast, you will hear a discussion with writer-director Jeff Nichols from the film Loving, moderated by Janet Pierson from South by Southwest, recorded at the Landmark in West Los Angeles.
You know, what brought you to make this?
Well, in 2012, I was approached by three producers: Colin Firth, the actor, his producing partner, Jed Doherty, and Nancy Bursky. Nancy had made a documentary called The Loving Story, which was on HBO, and they brought me Nancy's documentary to show me, and I had never heard of Richard and Mildred Loving before, and I was immediately struck by the fact that that's a bad thing. I should have known about these people. I should have known their story. This thing that is this incredible love story, but also an incredibly big part of our American history. Why wasn't this on the lips of every American? And especially in 2012, when you have, marriage equality bills going state by state, it just seemed shockingly relevant for me not to know about it. But even bigger than that, and I guess more integral to what you guys just watched, was this relationship that I had to Richard and Mildred as people. The documentary has this amazing archival footage in it that we just heavily leaned on, not just for the way they looked and talked, but who they were as people. I learned so much from that footage that it really informed the type of film I wanted to make, and I kind of fell in love with them.
How many people here have seen the documentary?
Good.
Well, what's interesting is because this is a story that you can tell with any story, right? There's so many points of view. There's so many ways to approach it. How did you it's so specific in terms of how you did approach it. How did you find your way in?
Well, it was pretty clear to me when I finished that documentary that I wanted to spend time with these two people. It was also clear to me that the most important thing about the story was the fact that these two people wanted to live together in their home, have these beautiful children, and not be bothered. That seemed to be the point of all this. It really wasn't a film about the civil rights movement as a whole. It wasn't a film about a court battle. It seemed to me to be a story about just two people that were told their existence wasn't right. And so it made sense to make a film from their point of view. The court case, which is well covered in the doc, is fascinating. And Bernie and Phil are amazingly intelligent guys. With the support of the ACLU, they pushed this case through to the Supreme Court in a really intricate, amazing way. But that had nothing to do with the day-to-day life of the Lovings. And I was struck by that. When I found out that they didn't go to the Supreme Court oral arguments, I was struck by this idea that you have these two people, their whole life is going to hang in the balance of this decision that's part of a system that they have no familiarity with, Their lives are being decided by this group of people way over here. And that felt as compelling as going inside the technical details of a court case. So really it was just attaching the story to their point of view and then just staying faithful to that, pretty much in all instances.
How the performances are so extraordinary. How did you decide on these two actors?
I wish I could take a lot of credit for it. Ruth was the first person that auditioned. We held auditions, and I work with Francine Maisler as a casting director out here. I've worked with since Mud. And that Ruth was the first person she brought in. I wasn't familiar with her work. When she walked in, she was real nervous. Ruth's actually a pretty shy person, which is odd to be an actor and be shy, but it's true. And I get nervous in those casting sessions because I want the actors to do a really great job. And so we didn't talk at all. And she sat down, and she had 4 scenes to do, and her posture changed, and she pursed her lips in this way that I immediately knew was Mildred. And this voice came out, and I immediately knew that she had been doing what I had been doing to write the script, which is just studying this documentary and this footage. And it was beautiful. And she finished, and I wanted her to know that she did a good job, so I went up and I gave her a hug. And then she loosened up and started talking to me in this Irish accent. And I didn't know what was going on. I was just confused. And then, but it was too late. She had the job already. And I knew I would be out on the road for a year, explaining to people why I cast an Irish person in this part. But it didn't matter. Seriously, she had an audio file of Mildred's voice. And while we were filming, she would go to sleep at night with it playing in her head. I mean, if you haven't seen the doc, go look at it, because it will prove the power of what Ruth Negga did in this performance. And then Joel, he's just a nice guy. And we were working on this movie, Midnight Special, together. And the mechanical work that Ruth had obviously done before she walked into that audition, I watched Joel do in Midnight Special. He was playing a Texas State Trooper. And I watched him break that accent down and that voice. And it was so impressive. And, it's important to note, like when I wrote this movie, Mud, I wrote this part for Matthew McConaughey. And it was really important that when I got to set, I heard his voice saying those lines. Well, I wrote these parts for Richard and Mildred, the real people, because that's who I'd been looking at. So I needed to find people that not just looked like them, but just had some, part of their essence. Ruth walked in the door with it. And as I got to know Joel, I just felt like he could really nail it. And I've had this experience with actors in the past where you just feel like it's their time. Joel's been in a lot of movies, but nobody, he's not necessarily a household name. I just felt like it was his time.
Yeah, I've enjoyed him in everything that I've seen that he's done, but this was a whole different step for him, and it was very exciting to see him move into that. Okay.
Yeah, she's asking if I spoke to any of the loving children. Yes, and it's a sad answer. Out of the 3 children, Sydney and Donald, the boys, have both passed away. They died of cancer. So Peggy's the only surviving child, and in 2012, when I started the work, I immediately went to Virginia, and she's the first person I sat with. I went to dinner with her, and I was nervous, but I was so excited, and I started asking questions. Was there music in the home? What kind of TV shows did you watch? How much laughter was there? And I quickly realized she was much like her father, and she didn't talk a lot. And to her credit, she had just done this documentary with Nancy and probably opened up more than she had in her entire life about them. In fact, there were several people that I spoke to, and they kind of were like, well, I just answered everything for the doc, so just go watch that. Which is interesting, though, because Nancy gave me a hard drive with all of the outtakes of all the interviews. So it was like having 4 years of research just dumped in my lap. But Peggy, as a result, just became just a person that gave me permission to carry this very precious thing, which is the memory of her parents. I shared the script with her before we started filming. That was an emotional experience. I went to her house. She still lives in Central Point. And she was sitting in this big lazy boy, and she was just flipping through the script with like this. And she had this stern look on her face, and I just thought, because I'm a narcissist, because I'm a filmmaker, like, oh, she hates it. She just hates it. She hates it. What are we going to do? And then she looked up, and she had tears in her eyes, and she just said, they're all gone. And it just struck me that yet another example of the fact that these are not characters in a movie. These aren't, chess pieces on a board. That these are real people, and I have a responsibility to them, not to show them for being better than what they were, but just to try and show them for who they were, which was pretty damn good. And then she came to set a couple of times, about 3 times, and it was the same type of experience, which was, Peggy, how are we doing? And she would smile and say, you're good. And that would be about it. But sure, she's asking how many drafts of the script I had and how that influenced what I shot. And I really did 1 draft, to be honest. The second draft, there was technically a second draft, but I changed about 5 words. And that's not bragging, that's really what happened. The way that I write is heavily outlined. It's been that way for the other 4 films that I've made, which are all created from scratch. It's just a process that I've developed as a writer. I use note cards, and I have a big piece of cork in my office, and before I start to type anything, I have a note card for every single scene in the movie, so I can sit and watch the movie in my head. And so that's where the draft, because I don't want to. It's not that I'm that good or anything. It's that all of the drafts have happened, before I started typing, pretty much, and all those iterations. And yeah, this story though, it just was so clear to me that, and so delicate. We certainly had conversations like, well, do the lawyers need more scenes? Do we need more? We're not morons. We know what we're doing, and we know what we're not doing as well. And we just kept coming back to the answer that this is very delicate, and this balance that we're trying to strike between daily life and the progression of the years, but also the progression of the court case in the background is a really delicate balance. And if you go too far into the court case, it could just swallow you whole, because it's fascinating, but it has nothing to do with the day-to-day life of the Lovings. So she's asking a 2-part question. The first part being about, did we rehearse? And the second, since the film represents a feeling of kind of everyday life, was that scripted or did it just kind of play out? Does that sound right? I don't rehearse. It's something that I kind of developed with Mike Shannon in our first film. I've made every film with him in some role or another. And on our first film, I was standing around because I had him there a few days before we started filming, and I had the 3 main characters. This is for Shotgun Stories. I was like, do you guys, I don't even want to rehearse, or because I didn't know what I was doing. And Mike was like, oh, I like to keep the juice in the lemon. And so we've that's kind of been our methodology ever since. Kind of gross, but it's funny because every actor is different. I think these 2 actors probably would have really liked to rehearse, but I just don't do that. Actors are tricky. Sometimes they get into take 5 and take 6, and they figure it out, so that take 7 and 8 and 9 are real similar. And sometimes that's okay, because the blocking and everything's been worked out to such a degree that, and the plan in my head was so specific that it works out. But sometimes I'm really saved by that take 1 and take 2, because for whatever reason, the way the words came out or the way they moved in the scene was different than what maybe we wanted to calculate. So I always am afraid to not be rolling on that stuff. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. As far as the second part of your question, that's all scripted. All that stuff's scripted to a T. It's just the way I roll. But you have to think a lot about ordinary life, and it's not for everybody. My movies aren't for everybody. Trust me, I've read the reviews. But But, I've been married for 8 years now, and I think the way that I tell my wife I love her is by sticking around and doing the small things in between the anniversaries, and us living together and being together and raising a child together. It's these small moments that seem to be the most important. And that's what I thought of when I thought of Richard and Mildred, that the commitment for these two to live over this period of time under such duress, that's really the expression of love. Someone pointed out the other day that I don't think they ever tell each other they love each other through the whole movie, which always struck me as kind of insane, because I think they're telling each other that, in every scene. But, yeah.
Well, thank you for making such a beautiful work.
Thank you, guys.
You have been watching the Landmark Theater's Q&A podcast. For further in-depth discussions with filmmakers, be sure to check out the other Q&As available on our channel from past films. And remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel to stay up to date with all our bonus content. Thanks for watching.